I'm gonna be a difficult asshole. Talk about how lucky Chris and Tamara Lich are. Chris Barber and Tamara Lich. The government kept them in court for years, torturing, whether you like it or not, torturing them, wasting countless thousands, most importantly, wasting their time. And so, difficult part is, could have been much worse. What do I know about it? Well, I've done in court as a self-rep litigant. I've done 9 things most lawyers will never do. Using the Queen's laws, and I say that because a lot of people don't like the Queen's laws. A lot of people say we have a fake country, fake government, fake laws. And as a soldier, I visited the War Museum in Ottawa. And the first display is what's called the Canadian Prairie War, where one of the first wars, even before the Boer War, Canada was involved in as a country, was the war against rebels. And then it seems that war evolved and changed to a police action. And there was a transition where there were soldiers stationed in different places at the same time as the RCMP started. And so there are books written by, published, produced, funded by the Canadian Prairie War, or the Canadian War Museum, on the Prairie War. One book I have is titled The Last War Drum. And The Last War Drum talks about Chief Big Bear from Frog Lake, Alberta, and Chief Poundmaker from Cut Knife, Saskatchewan. Both are near each other, and other battle sites across the country. And most of those used the Queen's biggest guns against natives, Irishmen, French rebels, and Fenians. Fenians seems to be rooted in Irish history, term for rebel. So what do I know about the actions of the government? And how lucky, I said I was going to be difficult, is an understatement. How lucky Chris Barber and Tamara Lich are. So, through the 1800s, the Queen, the monarch, and the Canadian government, and the Attorney General of Canada at the time was the representative of the Queen, same as today. Though before we had a Prime Minister, it was the Attorney General that led the country or territory. And so they used heavy artillery, the Queen's biggest guns, to fight against rebels. We don't live in that time, but let's talk about the 1970s barn burning, or the logging protests in in BC, where the government sent plain-clothed RCMP officers to instigate fighting in the logging protest. The logging protest was too peaceful. So and in my own case, well, the RCMP, I have proof by my military chain of command documents of the RCMP fabricating evidence. And so in a threat assessment, they said I was a menace to society. That's not the exact words, that's my misquoting summary of a page full of defamation. Suggesting that I was a threat to society, that I needed two officer, any call to the police would have two officers showing up with backup. And an example of how dangerous that could be is I parked beside a bike cop in Fort McMurray one day, because that's what you do, you park beside cops, right? Well, he came to my window and he said he smelled liquor and he needed a breathalyzer, so I gave him my license, registration, proof of insurance, and he put my name in the computer, and he came back with 7 cruisers. I don't know how many cops were there, but I counted 7 cruisers to give me a breathalyzer. So when I passed the breathalyzer, well, you can imagine they didn't stop there. They weren't going to send 7 cruisers and just let me walk. So they charged me with something, I don't remember what it was. It didn't make any sense. And I checked the charge against the Traffic Safety Act, and there was no charge. It was completely fabricated. The charge was completely made up, drawn out of thin air, just to send me to court. And so, again, I'm going to be harsh and say most lawyers would have taken that to court. Non-existent charge. It feels like most lawyers would have taken that to court. So one thing led to another, and they kept me in court 3 times a month. I filed a court application for a bail hearing. I was supposed to be in jail. I didn't know it. On one incident, I'd found out that there was a warrant out for my arrest, that they did something to have me in jail. And I found out what I could because I had friends that are lawyers and cops, and I got different advice from different people and or suggestions, because lawyers don't give advice without a consult, even if it's a free consult. So I had lawyers giving me suggestions, cops, friends of mine, and I prepared I don't remember, I think it's called a habeas corpus application, to a bail application to bail me out of jail. So I showed up in court. I told the judge I had a bail application to bail myself out of jail. Most lawyers will never do that. There's a handful that have, that I know about. And so the judge granted my bail application. When I, and I'll back up a second, when I when I told the judge that I had a bail application for myself to bail myself out of jail, the Crown prosecutor had all the court security fill the courtroom, and I was just so overwhelmed and thankful that the judge granted my bail application. And so that's one thing I did that most lawyers will never do. Another is, some people have heard of King's Counsel or Queen's Counsel. They're like lawyers who've been recognized, awarded a prize, recognition for their work in the justice system, and I've had retiring lawyers, career lawyers, and lawyers who have been recognized, who were awarded the King's Counsel or Queen's Counsel, who couldn't understand some of the things I've done. So I'll try to summarize it by saying, sometimes it's unlawful to prosecute somebody twice for the same crime. And that's almost what they did to Chris by taking his truck to court. Though because it wasn't him, they found another way to take him back to court. I don't know why. Or maybe that was a different prosecution, though. Anyway, I'm not all up on what happened between Chris and Tamara, though. I know there was a truck thing that was a little different, and so, or in addition to, and that's just another way to harass them. So anyway, we have the human rights to not be tried twice, and it does happen, very rarely, where somebody can and has been tried twice. There's an Alberta RCMP officer who was tried for drinking and driving off duty. The judge let him off, and one of his bosses within the RCMPK division wrote a letter and had that cop retried for a second trial to be prosecuted for drinking and driving. That's one example. There are a few. I managed to have a case brought back in my favor for a second trial against somebody else. The situation, there was two major changes in circumstance A change in circumstances, like, so I'll name one of those. My lawyer, I had a lawyer for one case, my biggest, hardest, most important case. He got me a court order to make the RCMP disclose evidence to let me defend myself. I was shocked and surprised. I was surprised. I thought nothing could surprise me, but I was surprised to learn that the RCMP had breached 17 items in that court order. That's 17 breaches. I didn't think the cops were allowed to breach court orders. So I was shocked, and it traumatized even, because like I thought that was going to be the answer. They'd finally disclose the evidence and I'd finally be able to defend myself, and of 20, I think it was 23 items ordered, they breached 17 or so. So that's a major change in circumstance. There was at least 2 major changes in circumstance, and the judge ruled in my favor, brought an item back to be retrialed. And so that's something else. Retiring senior King's Counsel lawyers have never heard of anybody having a situation. Tried twice. And I could go on. And I don't know now, I forget now if it's 9 or 10 things. There was an addition. I don't remember if 9 was the addition or if 10 is the addition, but anyway. And in the end, I successfully defended myself against all the RCMP allegations, except one was tried. The rest of them were stayed or withdrawn or dismissed, and so they kept me in court 3 times a month for 3 years on average. Once I was in court 1 time 1 month. Twice I was in court 4 times, and 3 times I was in court 5 times in 1 month, or maybe twice 5 times and 3 times 4 times, 3 months 4 times, and 2 months 5 times. It's been a while. That was about 2016, 2017. There's a 3 to 4 year stretch where one time I was in court 8 times, March 2018. They had me in court 8 times, March 2018. And they finally accepted, the government accepted that I wasn't playing. And last night I found out that prosecutor, at the time of the hearing in June 2018, the prosecutor had introduced himself as a special prosecutor. And last night, and since 2018, I knew in court I'd taken note of his name. Since 2018, I've looked and looked and looked and looked. I knew it was in a calendar, notebook. And I looked through all my notebooks. I couldn't find his name. I looked countless times until last night. I opened one notebook and I found his name. I Googled it. I confirmed with a friend in St. Catharines, Ontario, near St. Catharines. I won't mention his name either because I don't need to get him in trouble. So the prosecutor that defended the government in June 2018, they flew him to Edmonton from St. Catharines, Niagara, Ontario, Niagara Falls area. So that's rare. Like, I mean, the only time I know of a case where they brought in a special person is where there's two examples. One is the Attorney General of Ontario had been charged for murder, driving drunk over somebody, manslaughter. And because he was the Attorney General, he had appointed many judges. He had influence over most of the judges. The courts decided to have a judge from BC flown into Ontario to prosecute him. He got a light prosecution, though that's one example. That's how rare it is. Some of the things I've done, like, not only do most lawyers never do the about nine things I've done, like, one thing I've done had, just as a citizen who believes in our justice system, troubles it may be, they had a special crown attorney flown in from Niagara Falls, St. Catharines, to defend the government. A special crown attorney defend the government of my criminal allegations against the government. Someday I'll go into details, but not today. In the end, it drove me crazy. 2020, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. My health got worse. When my health got worse, I didn't know my name, date of birth, day of the week. I couldn't make change. Simple math. I've been, and like I learned from the military, to look to subject matter experts. And mental health and communication, I've looked to world experts. Lots of people recover from schizophrenia. I'm not out of the water yet. You can watch some of my videos on my journey through recovery. In the meantime, I am I'm sorry. I insist. Chris Barber and Tamara Lich are lucky they didn't get it any worse. And about the day or two before trial, today's Tuesday, I think it was Sunday, maybe Monday, I messaged Chris Barber. And I just told him, I said by message, I hoped he would have family pulling security duty on his truck and home to make sure that the government wouldn't do anything quote-unquote illegal. And I say quote-unquote illegal because by law, the government is required to follow the law as it is written. That said, I want to touch back on the Prairie War and say Chief Big Bear of Frog Lake, Alberta, his famous quote is in large print, and I believe and preach Chief Big Bear's quote, which says, "We should not fight the Queen with guns. We should fight her with her own laws." I believe that with every ounce, fiber, molecule. Both from the Prairie War through to into the future. People in government and citizens outside the government will continue to act as they please regardless of what's written in law, including politicians writing policies. And now that I'm not saying, I'm gonna sound like I'm saying that we should not protest. That's the first rule in upholding our rights, is we have the right and we need to protest peacefully. But we got to follow through with holding the government accountable in court, like Chief Big Bear's quote. We should not fight the Queen with guns. We should fight her with her own laws. Have a good night.